Hi, my name is Andrew. I left my wife for another woman and I walked away from 2 children. That's the version people prefer because it's simple, clean, and easy to judge. It fits perfectly into a comment, a headline, a reaction video. It gives people a villain without asking them to think for more than 5 seconds. But wait. Before you decide who I am, before you comment, "You're disgusting," before you type, "This is what's wrong with men," before you unsubscribe even though you were never subscribed in the first place, let me tell you the truth. The truth they don't want you to hear. I was a good man, and I know how arrogant that sounds. That's exactly why people hate hearing it. I provided, I sacrificed, I stayed loyal, I stayed quiet, and I did everything society tells men they're supposed to do. I became the man everyone demands and then pretends not to need. I did everything right, and somehow I still ended up being the villain. That's the part no one wants to talk about, because once you accept that, the story stops being simple. And simple stories are the only ones people know how to judge. Everyone talks about expectations like they're some abstract idea, like they don't quietly ruin lives every single day. I was told exactly how my life was supposed to look. Work hard, get married, be loyal, provide, don't complain, don't leave, don't ask for more. That was the deal, and I accepted it because that's what a real man does. The promise was simple. Do everything right and one day you'll feel fulfilled. Reality was something else entirely. Reality was waking up every morning with a knot in my chest and pretending it was normal. Reality was realizing that doing everything you're told doesn't guarantee respect, affection, or even basic emotional acknowledgement. I kept giving and the return was silence. I kept adjusting, shrinking, compromising, telling myself this was just how adult life works. Expectation says marriage is partnership. Reality feels like a performance where you're only valuable as long as you don't ask for anything back. Expectation says sacrifice is noble. Reality says sacrifice is only praised when it's invisible. The moment you admit it hurts, you're suddenly weak, selfish, or ungrateful. And the worst part, everyone keeps telling you this is normal, that this is what grown-ups do, that wanting more is childish. So you stay, you swallow it, you convince yourself that numbness is maturity. And you don't even realize how empty you've become because no one ever taught you that this wasn't supposed to feel like punishment. Marriage is sold as love, but what no one tells you is that love slowly turns into obligation. Somewhere along the way, the relationship stops being about two people choosing each other and starts being about roles that must be maintained. Husband, wife, parents, responsibilities, routines. You don't notice when it happens, because it's gradual, like boiling water. One day you wake up and realize you're no longer a person, you're a function. In my marriage, everything became transactional. I brought stability, money, consistency. In return, I was expected to be grateful just for being needed. There was always something more I had to fix, something I had to improve, something I wasn't doing enough of. And somehow that was framed as love. If I questioned it, I was told I was overthinking. If I felt unhappy, I was told that's just life. The marriage wasn't abusive. That's what makes it dangerous. There were no screams, no drama, no obvious villains, just slow erosion. Just years of being taken for granted and told that this was normal, that this is what commitment looks like. The absence of affection was rebranded as maturity. Emotional distance was called stability. And the strangest part is how everyone applauds this. Friends say, that's marriage. Society says that's adulthood. As if choosing to endure quiet misery is some kind of achievement. As if wanting to feel wanted is asking for too much. At some point you stop asking whether you're happy and start asking whether you're allowed to be. That's when I realized the marriage wasn't falling apart. It was functioning exactly as designed, just not for me. Looking back, it's easy to see the pattern. That's the dangerous part. At the time, everything felt isolated, like small, unrelated moments you're supposed to ignore. A comment here, a look there, a sigh when I spoke, a silence that lasted a little too long. Nothing dramatic enough to complain about, but enough to slowly teach me that my presence was tolerated, not desired. It wasn't one big problem, it was repetition. Day after day of the same dynamic, the same imbalance, the same quiet message that I was useful but not necessary. Every time I tried to address it, it was minimized. You're reading too much into it. You're being sensitive. It's not that serious. And eventually you stop bringing it up because patterns don't need arguments. They just keep happening. I started noticing how everything flowed in one direction. My effort was expected. My patience was assumed. My silence was rewarded with stability. And the moment I showed doubt or exhaustion, it was treated like a flaw. Like I was breaking an unspoken rule. That's when I understood this wasn't a rough phase, this was the system. People love to say relationships take work, but no one explains what happens when the work becomes one-sided. When compromise quietly turns into erasure. When you're told you're valued, but only as long as you don't demand to feel valued. Over time, you don't even argue anymore. You just observe, you collect moments, and without realizing it, you start preparing yourself for an exit you haven't admitted yet. That's the pattern no one warns you about. Not the fights, not the drama. The slow normalization of being emotionally absent while physically present. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I wasn't looking for anything. That's what everyone says, and it sounds cliché, but it's true in the way people hate the most. I didn't wake up one morning planning to betray my marriage. I was just existing, numb, going through the motions when contrast entered the picture. And contrast is dangerous because it doesn't argue, it just shows you what's missing. She didn't do anything extraordinary. That's the part people refuse to accept. She didn't save me. She didn't seduce me with some master plan. She simply noticed me. She asked questions and waited for the answers. She laughed at things I said without making me feel ridiculous for saying them. She looked at me like I was more than a role, more than a responsibility, more than a problem to manage. Suddenly, things I thought were normal didn't feel normal anymore. The silence at home felt heavier. The emotional distance felt louder. It wasn't that she was perfect, it was that the difference was undeniable. One space drained me, the other gave me air. And once you experience that contrast, you can't pretend you didn't. People love to say, of course it felt good, it was new. But that's a lazy explanation. Newness doesn't create respect. Newness doesn't create curiosity. Newness doesn't make you feel human again after years of feeling invisible. That wasn't excitement. That was recognition. That's when the real problem started. Not because I met someone else, but because I could no longer unfeel what it was like to matter. And once you know that version of yourself still exists, going back to pretending becomes the real betrayal. The real conflict wasn't between me and my wife, and it definitely wasn't about another woman. That's just the version that's easier to explain. The real conflict was internal, and that's the part people don't like because you can't point a finger at it. It was the slow realization that I was living a life that looked correct but felt wrong, and that staying was costing me more than leaving ever could. I was stuck between who I was expected to be and who I actually was. Every day I stayed, I felt like I was betraying myself a little more. And every day I thought about leaving, I was told that wanting more meant I was selfish, immature, ungrateful. As if suffering quietly was some kind of moral obligation. As if choosing yourself automatically makes you the villain. People frame it as a choice between right and wrong, but it never feels that clean when you're inside it. It feels like choosing which version of yourself you're willing to let die. The man who keeps going out of duty or the man who admits that duty without connection is just a slower form of disappearance. And the hardest part wasn't deciding what I wanted. The hardest part was realizing that no one was ever going to give me permission to want it. If I stayed, I would be praised for endurance. If I left, I would be condemned for honesty. Either way, I was going to lose something. The only question was whether I was willing to lose myself. That's when I understood the conflict was never going to resolve itself. There was no perfect timing, no clean ending, no version of this where everyone walks away happy. There was only the decision to keep pretending or to finally stop. The decision didn't come with clarity or relief. It came quietly, almost calmly after everything else had already fallen apart inside me. People imagine a dramatic moment, a fight, a suitcase by the door, someone shouting, "I'm done." It wasn't like that. It was the moment I realized I couldn't keep living a life that required me to disappear in order to function. I didn't wake up choosing to destroy anything. I woke up choosing to stop lying. To myself first. I understood that staying would mean teaching myself day after day that my needs didn't matter, that numbness was normal, and that endurance was the same thing as love. And once you see that clearly, staying doesn't feel noble anymore. It feels dishonest. Leaving wasn't easy and it wasn't impulsive. It was heavy. It was terrifying. It was knowing that no matter how carefully I explained it, I would be reduced to a single sentence. He left. No context, no years, no internal battles, just the outcome. But I also knew that if I stayed, the cost would be invisible, spread over decades and blamed on me anyway. So I chose the pain that was honest over the pain that was expected. I chose to be judged out loud instead of slowly erasing myself in silence. People call that selfish. Maybe it is. But I had reached the point where choosing myself felt less cruel than continuing to live as someone I no longer recognized. That was the decision. Not between people, not between right and wrong, but between continuing a life that looked correct and finally admitting that correctness was killing me. The aftermath wasn't loud. It was cold. It was waking up in a quiet space and realizing that everything had changed, even though the world kept moving like nothing happened. Suddenly, I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't a daily presence. I was a headline in someone else's story. He left. That was it. That's all anyone needed to know. People assume leaving brings instant happiness. That's another lie they like to believe. What it really brings is isolation. Friends choose sides without asking questions. Family goes silent. Conversations stop mid-sentence. You feel watched, judged, reduced to a mistake instead of a person. Every look feels like a verdict. Every silence feels earned. The hardest part wasn't missing what I lost. It was knowing that no matter how much pain I was in, it didn't count anymore. My sadness had an expiration date. My regret was irrelevant. Once you become the one who leaves, you're not allowed to hurt. You're only allowed to be wrong. I missed my children in ways I don't talk about, because the moment you do, people assume it's manipulation, as if pain has rules, as if longing has conditions. I carried the weight quietly because anything else would have sounded like excuses. And yet, every night reminded me that consequences don't always come as punishment. Sometimes they come as emptiness. This was the price, not freedom, not joy. Just the knowledge that I chose a truth that isolated me. And that isolation was the proof that I would never be seen as anything other than the man who walked away. If you've watched this far, it's probably not because you agree with me. It's because something in this story touched a nerve you don't like to admit is there. Maybe you're angry because it's easier than asking yourself uncomfortable questions. Maybe you're judging because judgment feels safer than honesty. Or maybe deep down, You recognize parts of yourself in things you swore you'd never become. Everyone likes to believe they would do the right thing in a situation like this. That they would stay. That they would endure. That they would be stronger, better, more selfless. But it's easy to say that from the outside when you're not the one waking up every day feeling unseen, unheard, slowly disappearing while everyone applauds your sacrifice. So ask yourself something, not out loud, not in the comments, just honestly. Are you living the life you chose or the life you were told to accept? Are you staying because you want to? Or because leaving would make you the villain in someone else's story? And if one day you reach the point where choosing yourself costs you everything, would you still call it selfish? You don't have to answer. Most people won't. But if this made you uncomfortable, if it made you defensive, if it made you pause for even a second, then this wasn't really about me. It was about you. And that's the part no one ever warns you about. Comment below if you think you'd make a different choice, like if this hit closer to home than you expected.